Good afternoon. This is a Devar Torah on Parashat Va'Eira. It is the fourth parsha in the book of Bereshit, and in this parsha, it's an event-filled parsha, and to give a summary of the parsha, it starts on the third day after Abraham had his bris milah at a very advanced age, and God came to visit him, teaches us about the mitzvahs Birchas Cholim, visiting the sick, and three angels came in the guise of men, and one of the angels was sent there for to heal Abraham from his injury, from circumcision, not injury, but wound. The second was angel was to announce to Abraham and Sarah that they were going to be blessed with a child through Sarah. And the third angel was sent to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Gomorrah actually was 5 cities, which we'll have more to say about later. And after explaining the first two things, one, the healing of Abraham, and the second was the second angel explained the birth of the forthcoming pregnancy of Sarah, which was miraculous, and so I'll have more to say about that a little later. Abraham, was he sent gas? Hashem knew he was recovering from the circumcision. The third day is the most painful. Yet, and therefore Hashem raised the temperature so there'd be nobody for him to host Abraham. He always liked having guests and bring them to belief in the true God. And when he saw how disappointed Abraham was, he sent the 3 angels as guests. Now, he literally ran to greet them, and beyond that, he prepared a whole feast for them. He had some bread. He had Ishmael prepare the animal. Now, what happened was he was seeking a calf to make as part of the meal. And because of the merit of wanting to see guests in such challenging circumstances, he had to chase the calf. And what did he discover? This was in Hebron, the cave of Machpelah, where he discovered that both where Adam and Chava, the first man and woman, were buried, and he realized it was a very, very holy spot. And his merit of desire to do the mitzvah and welcoming guests, he merited to discover that location, which became the burial site of all the Avot and Imaot. Now, that is one of the first major events. Now, as Avram greeted and escorted 2 of the angels that still remained, because one angel had finished his mission because he had already healed Avram, God debated whether to tell Avram, who he was going to give the bracha and bestow the whole land, whether he should tell him that he was going to be destroying the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he thought, since I'm going to bless him, give him the land, why should I conceal this information from him? And Hashem told Avram that he was going to destroy the 5 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then Avram, very interestingly, began negotiating with him. And he said to God, if there are 50 righteous people, Siddiqim, in those cities, you're going to destroy the evil, you're going to destroy the good ones also. And Shem then said no. If there were 50 righteous tzaddikim, that's 10 for each city, he would not destroy it. Now, after that, he came down with the next challenge to Hashem, not challenge, but question. What about if there's 45? Which I'll come back to in a minute. Then he went down to 30, 20, and 10. That meant if there were 40, they would save the 4 cities where there were 40 righteous tzaddikim, 10 in each. 30 would save 3 cities, because there'd be 3 groups of 10. To 20, there'd be 2 cities, and 1 city. Now, in between, he does the number 45. And this is a very interesting question. Why 45? Why not 35, 25, 15, 5? So the answer is the number 45 meant that each city would have 9 individuals, righteous individuals. Now these, and then who would be the 10th individual? We see that the 10th individual, not individual, but who would make up the 10 would be God's Shekhinah himself. And we've seen that in many other themes, just to give one. When they talk about later, Abraham's descendants, Yaakov, and Yaakov's children going down, and grandchildren going down to Mitzrayim, Egypt. If you look at the number of all the people they say is going, is 69. One of the explanations that's given here is that the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence, which goes into exile with us when we're in exile, constitutes the 70th. That's at least one way of understanding it. And there's a more general concept that the Shekhinah is always with us and always present with us in a form that's hard to detect, but is really with us even in our exiles and darkest days in our history. And then the 2 angels go to Sodom and Gomorrah, and the local men tried to, they didn't like strangers, they assaulted them. In fact, it was because they were in a garden spot, literally, in the Middle East, a spot, beautiful water and land and trees and all the things one could think of to make it a garden spot. It's now the area of Yam HaMelech. It no longer has that appearance because at the time that the 5 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were overthrown, that was it became the Yam HaMelech and became a barren area. And finally, Lot and his wife and 2 daughters are allowed to leave. The angels get him out of his morning is coming because it's going to be destroyed. And what merit was he saved? Not because he was righteous, but because he was Abraham's nephew. And first he asked 1 city, Zohar, be saved. Eventually, the first 4 cities were destroyed, and then the angels got him out of there with his 2 daughters. What had happened to his wife? She had looked back at the destruction. Since she didn't merit leaving in the first place, it's a principle that one cannot witness something that one did was not at the level to be saved, and therefore she turned into a pillar of salt. Lot's daughters, thinking that Lot and the 2 of them were the only people left in the world. They both wanted to have a child by Lot. One was there with each night with their father, that they were not aware of what was going on. He was not aware of what was going on. But that was the next event. Now, after that, Abimelech who was the king of the Philistines. When they went there, we have a similar incident you did in last week's parsha. Yeah, Abraham tells his wife Sarah, say it's me, you're my sister, not my wife, because he thought they would kidnap her and kill him, so she'd be available to the king. And he then, but she again, as I mentioned last week, was protected by a guardian angel, so he wasn't putting her in harm's way, in a line of danger. And when God came to Abimelech, he warned all the people they could not go near either one of the couple. And then Abimelech invited Abraham and Sarah to stay. Now the question remains is, in the case of Egypt, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, sent them out. Here, they were allowed to sell. What was the difference? Egypt was so evil and so immoral. This was before the time of Yosef. Pharaoh was not an absolute ruler at this point, and he knew that his people would not listen to anything he said. They were so immoral. In the case of the Philistines, they had some fear of God, especially when the king commanded them that anybody who harmed either Abraham or Sarah would be killed. Now, the next test that Abraham faces is, as Yitzhak, as promised, Yitzhak is the child of Abraham and Sarah. And as Yitzhak grows up, Ishmael, the son by Hagar of Abraham, is increasingly disturbing him. Sarah, with Nebuah, realizes that the continued presence of Ishmael will be destructive to Yitzhak, who is the next one of the abode in the next beginning of the generations that help make Bnei Israel, Jewish people. So they send them out with Hagar. She does not follow the right direction. She gets lost in the desert, abandons her son from a distance away when the water runs out. Now the angel comes to her, opens her eyes, and they see a spring, and Ishmael is saved. There's an inherent question, since Ishmael later on was going to become a Rasha, an evil person, why did God save him? We learn a very important principle from this, that God judges people as they are then, not what they will be in the future. Then what happens is a whole incident of Akedah Yitzchak, where God commands Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Yitzchak. Abraham is ready to do that. When it comes time for the sacrifice of Yitzchak, his only son, and his only posterity, Yitzchak knows what's going to happen, but to make sure he doesn't slip, he asks his father to bind him. This is where the term Akedah means, binding. Abraham binds him, puts him on in his back, the altar, and is about to kill him when the angel tells him not to. And it shows that Abraham had passed the test, the 10th of the test. Now, after that, the parsha concludes with the family lineage of Abraham, and it completes of his brothers, and it ends with saying one of the people's children named is Rivka, who is going to become the ultimate, the wife of Yitzchak, as we'll see in next week's parsha. But the interesting thing was the Ishkaka Pratos, Hashem's individual guidance, that she came at this time when Yitzchak was now ready to be married. And by her coming into the world, it protected him from having to worship an idol-worshipping, decadent, immoral woman. of land of Eretz Canaan, and that is the conclusion of the Parsha. Now, I'd like to look at the overall context of this Parsha and ask a number of questions. This Parsha and the previous week's Parsha is the beginning of the formation of the Jewish people, which will continue with Yitzhak, then Yaakov and Yaakov's sons, and make up the rest of the Boha Sefer of Bereshit, next 8 Parshas. In any event, miraculously, Sarah goes back in the way of women, as it describes, and Abraham is also able to have children. An earlier miracle that was made for Abraham, because he was originally unable to bear children, had to conceive children. So what happened at the end? So a question here is Yitzchak the descendant of Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve? Now, what is the nature of the question? The answer is, or is he a new reality? Now, looking at there's 2 aspects: spiritual descendants and physical descendants. Now, in terms of spiritual descendants, Adam and Chava had a 600,000 part neshama. Then neshama soul was inherited by Avram and Sarah, and every member of Bnei Yisrael has a halak of that, a piece of that complex neshama. So that being the case, so we're spiritually descendants of Adam and Chava. Are we physical descendants? And here a very important concept comes up. Physically, Avram and Sarai could not have children. When they were born, neither one of them had the capability necessary to conceive a child. And Abraham was transformed into where he could earlier than Sarah. And Sarai, only by a miracle, because Sarah was able to have a child at age 90. And the point here is, Derek Ateva, according to Mazzalot, the way of the world, the natural world, Avram and Sarai could not have children. Only when Abraham and Sarah were, through miraculous means, were able to have a child. That means without that, the line would have ended with Avram and Sarai. There would have been no descendants, and therefore, in a very real sense, physically, Yitzchak is not a descendant of Adam and Chava physically. Now, in fact, the whole conception was Mala Minateva. If you look later on how the 12 tribes came from Yaakov, that is also miraculous occurrences there. And that's representative of the Jewish people as a whole. They are Mala Minateva. In other words, the normal laws, so-called laws of nature, do not apply to them. And as evidenced by the fact that against tremendous odds and repeated exiles, we've always been maintained as a people. And ultimately, we will all be redeemed back into Eretz Israel at this Mount of Mashiach. So, and that also applies on a more practical level in terms of, for example, how much Parnassa income we receive is not dependent on so-called laws of nature, laws of economics, but is strictly directly run by God's Ishkaka Pratis guidance to us. And that is part of a larger preparation. So we see that Yitzhak comes as a whole new teva, whole new creation, whole new reality, and so for all of his descendants. Now, next, we are going to see, so that's part of the formation of Bnei Israel, children of Israel. Another part arises with Lot and his daughters. Now, the question is, what connection do Lot and his daughters and the children produced, Moab and Amnon, have to do with Abraham or Bnei Israel? And it goes like this. Everything that happened to Abraham and Sarah, including all the tests he went through, led to growth of him, and put it this way, greatly strengthened the spiritual DNA of both Abraham and Sarah, and Yitzhak by extension. And one part of the spiritual DNA of Abraham, that the quality of Abraham's chesed, kindness, some of that spiritual DNA had gone to Lot, who had been in Abraham's house for many, many years, and was going to be lost. So the reason the two nations, Moab and Ammon, descended from Lot and his daughters, was allowed to exist and thrive, was because the spiritual DNA of Lot was eventually going to be regained by the people, Bnei Israel, as explained by the Ramchal, because who were two righteous people producing the situation? One was Ruth, who was a Moabite princess, and she was redeemed by Boaz, and ultimately became the great-grandmother of David and Melech, in the whole ultimate messianic line that will descend from him at the right time. And of Ammon, there was Nama, eventually descended. She became the wife of Shlomo Amelech, from whom the next Davidic king came from. So we see, and on a greater level, that was allowing to recapture the extra qualities of chesed, a quality for which Bnei Israel is known, and has helped strengthen us, as the Ramchal explains, in the long exile. Now, however, it also, at the same time, also they would constitute two enemies of the people of Israel. And so Hashem, in a complex setting up of the history of the world, gave two aspects of that, depending how we behave. Ultimately, the people of those two nations, as well as the nation of Edom, which is Rome, which will be next week's parsha, dealing with Esav, were promised to Abraham, but they will only be given to us at the Zman HaMashiach, the ultimate redemption. Now, so that's the second stage of the ultimate development of Bnei Israel. The third stage is this whole concept of tests. Abraham had 10 tests, as it says in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, Mishnah Dalet, Mishnah 4, Asra Nisyanot of Nisnasa, Abraham Avinu Amid B'Kulam, Yehudia Kama Chibaso Shel Abraham Avinu. Our forefather Abraham was tested with 10 trials, and he withstood them all to show the degree of our forefather Abraham's love for God. But it goes deeper than that. Each one of those tests prepared us with qualities, him with qualities that went into his spiritual DNA, and Bnei Israel, all of his descendants, by extension, those qualities strengthened him and perfected him, and perfected helps perfect all, gives us the potential for us to be perfected. And 8 of those, and I'm going with the list of Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. The 10 tests, 8 of them occurred last week, Parashat, which was Abraham had to hide for 13 years from King Nimrod, who wanted to kill him. Nimrod flung Abraham into a burning furnace. Abraham was commanded to leave his family and homeland. And the 4th one, almost as soon as he arrived in Canaan, supposed to leave, escape of famine, and had that whole incident in Mitzrayim, Egypt, where the 5th one, Sarah, was captured by Pharaoh's officials. Then the 4 kings, as I discussed last week, captured Lot, and everyone was forced to go to war with him, rescue him. 7th one, God told Abraham that his offspring would suffer under the 4 monarchies. This was the brief of Sarim. At an advanced age, he was commanded to circumcise himself and his son. Those were the ones last week. This week's Parsha, there's the final 2. He was commanded to drive away Ishmael and Hagar, which a man of Abraham's chesed was a extreme challenge, only because God commanded Abraham to listen to Sarah. When she told him that, did he do it, and it was in great pain. And the final test was Akedah Yitzchak, the sacrifice of Yitzchak. Now, that test was the ultimate test because it meant that he was destroying the whole future of not only him, but the whole future of his descendants that had been promised. Yet he did it willingly. He rose the next morning after God commanded him the previous night, got to it quickly 3 days later. He did it. Yitzhak cooperated also. And as I said, he has to be bound. Now, that spiritual DNA also exists for us. That also went into our spiritual DNA. And let's look at it a little deeper. According to the Arizal, there's a relation between the 10 sayings of which the world was created, the 10 tests of Abraham, the 10 plagues, and the 10 commandments. Now, with the 10 tests of Abraham are in reverse order. Like the 10th one is the equivalent to the first saying with which Hashem was created the world, and that would be Bereshit Elokim et Hashemayim va'aretz, the whole creation. So what was this test? Is realize that everything comes from Hashem. Hashem gives us life, and to sanctify his name and follow his commandments, we have to always Makadosh to make them holy. Now that can be by our example as righteous individuals, men and women as righteous individuals. It doesn't have to be giving one's life. In extreme circumstances, as Yitzchak was prepared to do, it involved that. And the 10 tests were in the reverse order because the human race had sunk so low that when Abraham and Bnei Israel are going to descend from him, had to be elevated. Now, the 10th plague, which was also for the same reason, later on the people sunk down. We went to exile in Egypt, and Pharaoh thought he was God. He claimed he was God, he wasn't. He claimed divinity, And the 10 plagues would show Hashem's true presence and strength. The 10th one being Machos Bokoros, the killing of the firstborn Egyptians and their slaves and the animals. And again, this is to show the true power of giving life and taking life, and the entire history is all under Hashem's direct guidance. And the first of the Seros of Dibros, first of the 10 Commandments, repeats a similar theme, because if one looks at it, what is that first of the commandments? Was Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Yitzticha Eretz Mitzrayim Beis Abadim. God spoke all these, said, I am Hashem, your God, who delivered you from the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. In other words, the total existence, our total existence is based on Hashem's beneficence and his desire for us to working with him to perfect the world. And that can be done, hopefully, by leading a righteous example, and recognizing everything is from him, and if necessary, giving one's life. However, again, I want to emphasize that's only in extreme circumstances. The real ultimate reason, the ultimate way, is to sanctify Hashem by our actions, by learning Torah. As we are heading into the winter season, may we all have a very good winter and a good and healthy winter, and good learning and performance of mitzvahs, good Shabbos, and Shabbat Shalom.